Hello, my name is Isaidy Medina, and I'm a junior at Yale and Silliman College studying history with a certificate in the Medieval Studies program. I'm also a tour guide at the Yale Center for British Art. Before we begin, I would like to let you know that this talk is being given as part of the center's online programming while it is closed for conservation through to the spring of 2025. This is part of a larger series where other student guides will present their talks virtually to the public. The title of my talk today is Power and Visibility, Exploring 18th and 19th Century Femininity in British Art. As someone interested in classical art and civilization, my talk today is centered around mythical women, queens, and sorceresses, as well as women in positions of power and visibility. I will discuss how their interpretations in early modern and Victorian Britain defy social expectations, and how they comment on ideal beauty, femininity, and the behavior of women in the 18th and 19th centuries. And so, the first object I would like to point you to today is titled Fanny Eaton by Joanna Boyce Wallace and painted in 1861. At first look, we are met with a portrait of a woman against a plain background of green with hints of blue and gray. We take note of her double pearl earring, her hair beads, and her shawl amidst the surrounding blue and green hues. Focusing on Fanny's face, there's a palpable sense of calmness as she presents a serene side profile, which is accentuated by her graceful and elongated neck. We immediately feel that this woman is very beautiful. Upon closer observation, we see a remarkable level of detail reflected in this portrait. Fanny's hair, for example, has a broad spectrum of brown shades which create a sort of depth. The brush strokes are very prominent on her face, and we can capture nuances such as the vivid red of her lipstick and the warmth of her brown eyes. Additionally, her shawl is adorned with intricate features, including a striped pattern, lifelike creases, subtle shadowing, and a blue-tinged outline. We also notice some hints of gold, brown, and gray, along with the white of the shawl. When we see this painting in person, when normally exhibited at the museum, we also notice that the frame is very wide, with the actual portrait being very small. This clues us into the fact that this painting was a study for a larger piece. And what such a large frame does is put into perspective how small this is. This aspect, however, lends the portrait a sense of intimacy and preciousness, almost like a miniature or keepsake, immortalizing Fanny's beauty. It's quite fascinating to consider that during this period, we have a portrait featuring a woman, particularly a Black woman, painted by another woman. This portrayal of a Black woman's natural beauty challenges conventional norms, especially given the historical backdrop of slavery and this post-abolition society. So, let's explore the identities of both women, starting with Joanna Boyce Wallace. So, Joanna Boyce Wallace was born in London in 1831 and first exhibited her work publicly in 1855 at the Royal Academy. The Royal Academy of Arts, founded in 1768, stands as a prestigious institution dedicated to fostering the visual arts. Exhibiting at the Royal Academy holds significant prestige for artists globally. In the 19th century, the Royal Academy played a pivotal role in shaping the artistic landscape of Britain and beyond. It provided a platform for artists to exhibit their work, gain recognition, and engage in artistic discourse. Thus, it's important for women, such as Boyce, to reach this level of importance. Boyce began her career from a young age with support from her father and her brother. She began a formal study of drawing by the age of 11 and filled multiple sketchbooks as a young teenager. In 1855, she exhibited 2 portraits at the Royal Academy, but it was Algiva which earned her the praise of John Ruskin. He wrote, "It seems to me that she might entertain the hope of taking place in the very first rank of painters." In her lifetime, she traveled throughout Europe and wrote art criticisms and commentaries on the pre-Raphaelite movement, of which she was a part. The pre-Raphaelites were known for breaking a sort of convention in that they wanted to renew British art and return to a time before Raphael's contributions to the art world. They also wanted to portray classical ideals of beauty and nature. Due to this, they largely focused on intimate and emotional scenes. Unfortunately, Boyce died shortly after her 3rd childbirth at the age of 30. But it's important to consider her work in the context of the time period she lived in. While those around her were striving to portray classical ideals of beauty, she painted a beautiful portrait of a Black woman. Who then was Fanny Eaton? Fanny Eaton was born Fanny Entwistle in St. Andrew Parish, Jamaica, to the formerly enslaved Matilda Foster. She was born just 10 months following the August 1834 enactment of the abolition of slavery throughout the British Empire. Eaton arrived in England in the 1840s with her mother and began working as a domestic servant. She married James Eaton, a cab and coach driver, in 1857, and they had 10 children between 1860 and 1879. Eaton began modeling during her marriage, posing for both the Royal Academy and the Pre-Raphaelites. Notable works featuring Eaton include Dante Gabriel Rossetti's The Beloved. She also modeled for other artists such as John Everett Millais and William Blake Richmond. While most other models at the time would have remained anonymous, documents in the Royal Academy archive show that Eaton occasionally worked as a life model for the RA schools in the 1880s, as I've mentioned before. Mrs. Eaton is recorded as completing 3 sittings of 2 hours each, for which she was paid 15 shillings. And that was 15 shillings for each sitting, which was the standard payment for RA models. Simeon Solomon, however, was the first artist to depict Fanny Eaton, with his painting The Mother of Moses. It debuted at the Royal Academy in 1860, and critics at the time responded unfavorably to Eaton's features and dark complexion in the artwork. What's really interesting about this piece is we see that Fanny Eaton is being portrayed and modeling for the mother, but we also see a child next to her who's looking at this baby Moses, and the child also looks very similar to Eaton. And so in the past, others have speculated that this was Eaton's real-life child modeling for the role of her child in the portrait. After Fanny's husband died in 1881, Eaton worked as a seamstress and later as a domestic cook. She passed away in 1924 at the age of 88. Eaton's legacy is complex, with her portrayal in contemporary Victorian art exhibitions sparking discussions on both representation and exploitation. With that short discussion of Eaton's life in our minds, we can explore her significance as a model within the context of evolving social dynamics and the position of women of color in British society. We understand that Boyce Wells created this piece as a study and preparation for a larger painting featuring Eaton, in which she would portray her as the ancient Greek, Persian, and Egyptian sibyl Zab. In researching for this talk, I found sketches from Boyce Wells' sketchbook at the British Museum from her sessions with Fanny Eaton. What we see from these is that Eaton's shawl is very long, stretching down to the floor, and that she's not sketched in a full frontal view. We focus on her face and her features. We also see some Egyptian hieroglyphs on the side of this sketch. as it had been Wells's intention to paint Eaton as an ancient Sibyl seated on a throne, in a style that was very similar to Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel Sibyls. Her sketchbooks show a number of images, suggesting her planned painting would have depicted her model as a powerful, stunning Black woman. And so Fanny was going to be painted as the strong and powerful ancient female figure, which is interesting in the context of classical and pre-Raphaelite beauty. In other studies of Eaton, we see that there is not as much color, whereas this study by Joanna Boyce Wells has an interesting use of color that accentuates Eaton's natural beauty. And so we might say that in this way, Boyce Wells is providing visibility and associating beauty with the woman of color. In other works of the time, Eaton emerges as a peripheral and unnamed presence. She is depicted in a diverse array of biblical, genre, and literary scenes. Her unique facial features, which the artist saw as having an exotic allure, lended itself to portray various ethnicities, spanning from Hebrew to African identities. Thus, Black people in Victorian art typically were decorative figures, and rarely seen as models for an ideal classical beauty. And in the context of biblical depictions, as I've shown before, artists wanted to be seen as accurate with their ethnic depictions. And so models like Fanny Eaton would have been used for a biblical portrait. In this way, Eaton challenges assumptions of what a Black woman represents. In fact, she's often been called Victorian Britain's most visible woman of color. In this painting by Joanna Boyce Wells, Eaton is providing more visibility for Black women in the fact that she is made the subject rather than a side character. At the same time, we learn from the painting's label that this picture was unsold at the time of the artist's death and was apparently never exhibited during her lifetime. This suggests that the artist may have been sensitive to its potentially controversial nature. How then does this painting of Fanny Eaton subvert what someone in Britain might have seen as a Black woman in the 1860s? Considering that Eaton was born merely 10 months following the abolition of slavery in Britain, it's improbable that there were showcases of opulence, beauty, or femininity emerging from individuals who had just transitioned from being enslaved and being sold as commodities. Other Black people would likely not have been given as much visibility or attention or even be regarded as beautiful. For example, the evolution of the painting's title from Head of a Mulatto Woman to Head of a Mulatto Woman, Mrs. Eaton, to Study of Fanny Eaton to simply Fanny Eaton signifies a transition in the portrayal of her identity. The initial title, Head of a Mulatto Woman, suggests that her identity is solely defined by her mixed racial heritage. And so, with the changes in title, we witness a shift towards acknowledging Fanny Eaton as an individual with a distinct identity that goes beyond her racial categorization. This transition may symbolize a broader trend of increased visibility and perhaps recognition for Black women in Britain following the abolition of slavery. In a 2022 celebration plaque for Eaton, and here we have pictured her great-grandchild, she was described as changing the perception of beauty, underlining her role in reshaping societal ideals. Ultimately, this portrait of Eaton is simple, powerful, and introspective. It feels more private and personal and highlights her natural beauty, all while making her the subject. In examining this portrait of Fanny Eaton, I am reminded of the work of Joy Gregory, particularly her self-portrait series. Gregory was born in Bicester, England in 1959 to Jamaican parents. She grew up in Buckinghamshire and pursued her education at Manchester Polytechnic and the Royal College of Art. Growing up, she encountered a lack of representation of Black women, especially in the realms of fashion and beauty. Despite the burgeoning diversity of the 1970s, mainstream media largely omitted Black faces, fearing an alienation of their core readers and advertisers. And so, while living outside of London, Gregory lacked access to American Black beauty magazines and grappled with the low-quality images of Black women that she would receive. In response to this invisibility, Gregory created Autoportrait in 1989. This is a series of 9 black and white self-portraits sequentially arranged to portray fragments of her upper body, face, and hands. Through close-up engagements with the camera lens, she delved into the complexities of beauty, femininity, and political identity. Gregory herself said of this work, "Autoportrait was my response to the invisibility, beyond the exotic, of Black women in British fashion and beauty images. Among all of the self-portraits that I've made, it's the only series in which the body alone is its focus. The intention is to conjure up the mood of the catwalk, all fantasy and glamour, a world from which me and my kind had been almost totally excluded. The sub-Saharan Black woman of the photographs, with her broad nose, large eyes, and lips, is a distant, glamorous figure of unattainable beauty." Comparatively, Fanny Eaton's portrait addresses the invisibility of Black women in a similar way, as her face is never fully presented head-on. This narrative of invisibility and yearning for representation resonates with this portrayal of Fanny Eaton and challenges prevailing norms of beauty and femininity in both the 19th and 20th centuries. Despite the passage of time, themes of visibility and representation remain intertwined with ideals of beauty and Black femininity in contemporary society. And so, to transition from this discussion of Drake Gregory and Fanny Eaton, I'd like to turn to Henry Fuseli's interpretation of another legendary figure, obviously in the context of the study for the mythical Persian Sibyl Zab. Now we'll turn to Henry Fuseli's interpretation of Dido, the tragic queen of Carthage. In Fuseli's depiction, we encounter a scene steeped in sorrow and mythological allure. In the Aeneid, Dido is placed under a spell and falls deeply in love with the Trojan hero Aeneas, who's on a journey to found Rome. After Aeneas abandoned her to fulfill his destiny, Dido constructed a funeral pyre using the couple's bed and the belongings left behind by Aeneas. As she watched the Trojan ship sail away, consumed by her despair, she ascended this pyre and stabbed herself with Aeneas' sword. In the scene of intervention, the goddess Juno, who's the protectress of Carthage, dispatched her messenger Iris to cut a lock of Dido's hair, which would release her soul. Fuseli presented this painting at the Royal Academy in 1781, nearly 2 years after his arrival in Britain. To Fuseli, Dido's tragic demise symbolized supreme beauty in the jaws of death. Before delving into the painting's details, it's important to grasp the overarching scene that's being depicted. The focal point is on Dido, positioned atop a pile of logs, which is showing the funeral pyre that she constructs. The pyre represents her act of suicide. Beside Dido, we have this first figure of her sister in a brown dress and a blue ribbon in her hair. She kneels beside Dido with her arms draped over her in a gesture of sorrow and support. The other figure is the goddess Iris coming from the top. But if we zoom in on Dido's feet, as we have here, she's laying on top of the logs, and despite her lifeless form, her body has perhaps subtle movements in the way that she's draped with her knees and hips facing different directions. The whiteness of her skin, however, almost makes her look like marble. We also see the bloody sword, pointing skyward, serving as a stark reminder of the tragic nature of her demise. In Iris's hand, we see a curved scythe, which is associated with the act of cutting off Dido's hair. As I've mentioned before, this ritualistic gesture is believed to facilitate the release of her soul, allowing it to journey to the underworld. The presence of the goddess shows the profound mythological and symbolic elements that are woven into the narrative, and the larger theme of divine intervention throughout Virgil's Aeneid. In Fuseli's painting, Dido assumes a position that's reminiscent of Christ on the cross, evoking themes of sacrifice and martyrdom. Anna is positioned with her back to the spectator, while Dido's expression remains stoic and devoid of any discernible emotion. Despite this, her pain is palpable, notably emphasized by her exposed breasts, suggesting a portrayal that's influenced by the male gaze. Dido is placed centrally within the composition, almost between the mortal and the divine, represented by her sister Anna and the goddess Iris. She's in this transitional state between life and death. The drapery enveloping her assumes a skin-like quality, rendering her an object of aesthetic contemplation and objectification, and she is perpetually frozen in her grief. I'd like to quickly discuss who Henry Fuseli was and how this painting came about. Fuseli was born in Switzerland and received a classical education, showing early talent in art, though he initially pursued theology. He studied in Switzerland and eventually traveled to England in 1764, where he would spend most of his life. He is best known for his exploration of supernatural themes. His works often delved into the realms of mythology and the macabre. His most famous painting, The Nightmare, captured the public's imagination with its depiction of horror, dark magic, and sexuality. Fuseli's career flourished in Britain, where he exhibited at the Royal Academy and created pieces for John Boydell's Shakespeare Gallery. He was also renowned for a series of paintings inspired by the works of John Milton. Fuseli's style, marked by exaggerated proportions and contorted figures, reflected his admiration for the grandeur of Michelangelo's works. Despite painting over 200 pictures, Fuseli exhibited only a small fraction of them, choosing to focus more on sketches and designs. His influence extended beyond his own works, impacting the art of his contemporaries and future generations of British artists, including William Blake. The genesis of his painting of Dido stemmed from a challenge with Sir Joshua Reynolds, a renowned artist of the time. Fuseli observed Reynolds struggling with his own rendition of Dido at his studio, prompting Fuseli to undertake a similar subject for his own painting. This decision led to a notable confrontation when both pictures were displayed at the Academy in 1781, in the same gallery, on walls directly opposite each other. Fuseli's approach to art differed from many of his contemporaries, as he prioritized literary narrative above all else. This focus made him somewhat of an outlier within the Royal Academy. Despite this deviation, his work still maintained a fascination with classical and classicized bodies, evident even before he spent time in Rome. This blend of narrative fidelity and a reverence for classical forms distinguishes his artistic style, even amidst this challenge with Reynolds and the Academy exhibition. And so we can turn to a more multifaceted analysis of this painting of Dido and focus on the shifting paradigms of femininity and artistic representation of femininity in 18th century England. The figure of Dido, who is positioned between classical beauty and modern sensibility, challenges the conventional perceptions of female roles in art and literature, particularly within the confines of the academic sphere. This coincides with a pivotal moment in the history of public exhibition, marked by the opening of Somerset House in 1780, providing new avenues for women and non-academics to engage with art. And so Somerset House was where the Royal Academy's exhibition would have taken place, or did take place. And so Dido, as I've mentioned before, is in a midpoint between life and death, the divine and the mortal realms, as well as classical beauty and modern sensibilities. In having her body exposed, Fuseli takes a more risque approach with his representation, because we see Dido's vulnerability and grief, all while exuding an element of voyeurism, fetishization, and the male gaze. Both Reynolds and Fuseli show Dido with her breast bared, almost romanticizing her death and her pain. And so, to a male viewer looking on this scene, we can't escape this fetishization and romanticization. At the same time, the painting denies sympathy for the male figure of Aeneas, foregrounding Dido's pain and emphasizing the scene of female solidarity and mourning. The interaction of female bodies challenges traditional power structures, forming a counterorder to the patriarchal norms of the Royal Academy. And Dido's nakedness would have been controversial to viewers at the time, symbolizing a departure from conventional beauty standards and embracing a more nuanced portrayal of femininity. And so Fuseli's depiction navigates the classical and Baroque, weaving together pagan allegory, Christian martyrdom, and modern sensibility. And so this synthesis reflects Fuseli's commentary on the evolving role of femininity, which exists at the intersection of tradition and modernity. And when exhibited alongside the Reynolds piece, Fuseli's painting represents a significant step towards female representation within the male-dominated space of the Royal Academy. By embracing a spectrum of female identities and experiences, Fuseli's Dido offers a profound commentary on the evolving dynamics of gender and power in 18th century England. And by that I mean that we're mixing the Christian world and the pagan world and this modern risque woman. And so she is in this midpoint of life and death and the moral and the divine, but also a female gender expression and identity. I also wanted to highlight that the picture I had of the Reynolds painting is a little unclear, and I included this mezzotint from the YCVA's collection to give us a clearer image. And so it's interesting when we see the outline of the wood and the pyre more clearly, and the faces as well, highlighting the scene of female solidarity and mourning, like I've mentioned. I would like now to turn to Rinaldo and Armida, an artwork that offers a voyeuristic lens and engages with the concept of the male gaze while delving into the realm of mythological narrative in a way similar to Dido. This painting was first shown at the Royal Academy in 1772 and draws inspiration from Torquato Tasso's Gerusalemme Liberata from 1580, a poetic retelling of the First Crusade. The tale revolves around Rinaldo, a handsome prince, and Armida, a captivating sorceress, dispatched by the devil to disrupt the Crusaders' endeavors. Armida, however, becomes enamored with Rinaldo, entangling him in her bewitching charm. The scene depicted captures the moment when Rinaldo's comrades stumble upon his location and are poised to rescue him from the enchantment and allure shared with Armida. In this painting, the scene unfolds deep within a forest, where the couple is concealed. Both figures are adorned in blue robes and clothing, with Rinaldo sporting a floral wreath on his head. There are curves in his cape and her outfit. Armida, as we see here, delicately places flowers above his head, while the ground around them is scattered with blossoms on the left. A mirror is also positioned nearby, reflecting their intimate encounter. Rinaldo leans on Armida's knee, gazing deeply into her eyes, symbolizing their emotional connection. In the background, as we have on the right, Rinaldo's companions stumble upon the scene, their presence feeling personal and voyeuristic rather than outright confrontational. They appear to observe this moment without interrupting, adding a sense of intrigue to the narrative. The predominant colors of the painting are blues, complemented by the reds and pinks of the flowers and the clothing. Notably, Ronaldo is depicted without his military attire, fully embracing the world that Armida beckons him into. This transformation signifies his immersion into the enchanting realm that Armida represents and creates. I'd like to quickly discuss who Angelica Kauffman was and her contributions to art history and the art world in the 18th century. Angelica Kauffman was a celebrated neoclassical painter known for her successful career in London and in Rome. She is remembered primarily for her history paintings, while she was also skilled in portraiture, landscape, and decoration. Alongside Mary Moser, she was one of 2 female painters among the founding members of the Royal Academy in 1768. Kauffman's early life was marked by travel, as her family moved through Switzerland, Austria, and Italy due to her father's work as a muralist and painter. Recognized as a child prodigy, Kauffman quickly gained renown as a painter, with bishops and nobles sitting for her portraits. She traveled extensively throughout Italy, studying the works of the old masters and honing her artistic skills. In 1765, her work was exhibited in England, and shortly after, she moved to London, where she became a prominent artist in British society. Kauffman's friendship with Sir Joshua Reynolds and her association with the Royal Academy further elevated her status in the art world. Despite facing challenges and controversies, including a rumored affair with Reynolds and criticisms of her work, she continued to thrive as an artist. Her contributions to the Royal Academy and her dedication to history painting earned her great recognition and respect. In 1781, after the deaths of her first husband and father, she married Antonio Zucchi and retired to Rome. She remained active in the art world until her death in 1807, leaving behind a legacy of remarkable achievements and contributions to neoclassical art. And now that we've seen Angelica Kauffman as this important female figure, we can turn back to Armida and see her agency and role in this painting. The composition of the painting forms an interesting triangular shape, with Armida's arm hanging above Ronaldo's head and his arm also leaning on her knee. This arrangement is creating a sense of unity and intimacy between the characters. And while the setting of Crusade hints at Christian themes, Armida's sorcery and mythical presence evoke pagan imagery, creating a juxtaposition of spiritual elements. Her raised arm exudes a subtle yet commanding power, hinting at her authority and control over the situation. In addition to Armida's dominance, Ronaldo's posture and demeanor also suggest a sense of submission. As we see his leaning position on Armida's knee and his gaze fixed upon her eyes, they depict him as yielding to her influence. Despite his companion's imminent arrival, Ronaldo appears enchanted by Armida, symbolizing his vulnerability to her sorcery and allure. This portrayal underscores the power dynamic between the 2 characters, emphasizing Armida's control over his fate and highlighting his submissive role. As Ronaldo's companions approach to rescue him, they too seem entranced by the scene unfolding before them. Their presence adds an element of voyeurism as they observe the intimate interaction between Ronaldo and Armida, hidden in the shadows. And so there's a sense of concealment from both pairs. The portrayal of femininity in the painting is characterized by Armida's dominance and agency. She is depicted as the one in power, with her bared breast symbolizing her allure and seductive appeal. This representation aligns with the male gaze, as Armida's figure captivates both the characters within the painting and viewers who would have seen it outside. And so Armida is a world builder, existing within the world building of the woman who has painted her, Angelica Kauffman. And so I would like to now conclude my tour by summarizing all of the key points that we've talked about. It's evident that the artworks portraying Fanny Eaton, Dido, and Armida share a common thread: the exploration of female authority, visibility, and ideals of beauty. Joanna Boyce Wells's portrayal of Fanny Eaton challenges societal norms, offering a powerful representation of Black femininity and visibility. Her presence challenges conventional standards of beauty. In this narrative of Dido's death, we witness the consequences of love and betrayal, but we also see powerful moments of feminine beauty and mourning, feminine ideal beauty and mourning. But we also see at the same time, it's a very complicated depiction. We see female solidarity and power and mourning, but we also see a fetishization of her pain and the fact that she is bared out, exposed and naked. But we are also given the scene also gives no sympathy to men in the way that Aeneas is not depicted in the picture. The painting of Rinaldo and Armida delves into themes of desire and influence, where the sorceress Armida holds sway over the knight Rinaldo. Here we see a portrayal of female authority and allure, again challenging traditional notions of male dominance. Moreover, when we examine modern works like Joy Gregory's autoportrait in the context of Joanna Boyce Wells's portrayal of Fanny Eaton, we see how these themes remain relevant. And so, through these artworks, we're reminded of the multifaceted nature of female representation and the significance of visibility in shaping cultural narratives, particularly in 18th and 19th century Britain. Each painting offers a lens through which we can explore notions of ideal beauty, power, and female agency, allowing us to consider the diverse experiences of women throughout history. So thank you so much for sitting through my talk today. This has been very great. Thank you.